So today is the 6th of December, and Jeremy, Sanjay, and I would be discussing some best practices related to Figma around what should a base component be like and what approach we should be taking when we are adding new variants and what's the basic difference between variants and instances. And along with that, also some discussion around how is it that we structure our components here at GitLab. Yeah, stage to you, Jeremy.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you for setting this up. First, I'm going to link to a document here. And actually, maybe I'll go ahead and I can share my screen too for the posterity and the recording. Let's go here. So in Pajamas, there is a document. So under Files, Doc, Pajamas UI Kit, there's a contribution and update guidelines that we have in there. And I'll just walk through this really quick, and then if there's anything that is that we can clear up and I guess add to, I'll follow up with like an MR to do so, because I want to make sure that everything is clear for everyone, and also about like where we can have this document to be potentially more visible or closer to the UI kit itself, because I think that could be potentially one issue. But in this doc, there are information about structure, like how we're structuring files, how we're building components, and that does go into like the base component, elements, variants, constraints, etc. And then some other items in there that we don't have to get into today about like descriptions, notes, publishing. But I'll just jump down to building components. And so the basic thing here is we're using base, and we're doing that where the base component tries to account for all the reasonable configurations that component could have. So the example here is the button, where it has the emoji, it has the icon before and after, it has the text label, and then there's base for different options here with like the drop down and the split buttons. And so one base doesn't account for all those, but we can have a base that has like variants itself to account for all those different configurations. And they're prefixed with an underscore just so that they don't get published to the library. But they are available, for use when they're in those components. And let's see here if there's anything I missed from that. I don't want to try to read this verbatim because that would be kind of boring. And so that's how we start. From there, we create all the variants and whatnot. And so I think there are naming conventions. I'm just bouncing back in between documents here. Apologies, but I want to answer the questions. So the first step, and feel free to jump in and interject. I don't want this to be just me rambling, so stop me at any point. The first question, what should a base component include? That is a fantastic question. I think it's going to depend on the component itself, but to provide a better answer, I would say anything that is potentially key to that, to the extension of how that component is going to be used. So for a button, knowing that, okay, we're going to have an emoji symbol, we're going to have iconography, text labels, wanting to include all of those elements in that base by default so that when we create variants, they're already there. And I'm starting to err on the side of having Figma be more verbose so that you don't have to have downstream changes where it's more difficult. And what I mean by that is including the emoji character, like you could actually just type the emoji in the button label itself, but it doesn't make it as easy to use and to work with. And so including that in there by default makes the base more verbose and has more things in there, but it's more easier to use. So that's where like the decision on what to include can be kind of a little fuzzy. It's really what's going to make it easier for the designer, the user to implement later on. Okay. I'll jump into a good example here I think one of the most complex ones is the form inputs, because there's label and description and et cetera. There's all these different items. And so one of the ways we've done this is, instead of the base text input having everything in there, kind of abstracted out the base even further. And so the field itself is a base, and that field, that base uses a base prefix and a base suffix. And as you know, we're working on like the base for the add-ons as well to make that an additional base. So in this way, we're able to even abstract out base components even further. And so that's kind of the thinking there. Let me see if there's any that are, I'm looking here to see if there's any that are really simple. Avatar, for example, has just different sizes. Since the shape is done with a border radius, the actual component itself, we can just tailor like the border radius as a property and not need to create like all the rounded rectangles and rounded squares for the base. So if those properties are there and able to be adjusted later in an actual component, then there's no need to make, a base for every one of them. So I'm just flipping through here to find any other like use cases.
Sure. We
Go
could
ahead.
try one more thing. So I found Sunjung's branch really interesting. I mean, if we can take that as an example, maybe, and just see like what could be the right approach to address that. Because I have been thinking a lot about that, and I just couldn't like. I worked on the input form field, but it was very difficult. Sunjung, do you have the link handy somewhere for the Figma branch?
Sure.
Is it for the drop-down variants or for the forms?
Yes, it's for the drop-down variants.
Okay, I can open it up here if you're.
I just paste a link in the agenda doc. Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And one thing I know that in the midst of working on this, there's probably been some updates to our process that have probably impacted this too. So, all right. Or do you want to drive, Sunjun, or?
No, I think I'm fine with you driving and
Okay.
walk us through the board. Thank you.
All right. So we have the base option. Actually, I'll put the UI back up here so we can see where we have just the base component. And it looks like today there's no variance on this, right? So this is only the way you'd use this is by using the base option component and then showing or hiding the different elements. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And I think before variants, that's kind of how we were approaching the base as well. So I think that I mean, it definitely works. And then there's the option. So this is the individual items that are for each, and then the drop down, which is the panel itself. So I'll let you, I guess, start with like specific questions that you have here. Or I guess, or yeah, is there, I guess, how could I help with this one? Sunjun, like what questions might you have? I see the ones in the document about creating a new variant or naming conventions, but is there anything specific, like just initially that I can help clear up?
So for instance, so I created the option variants here in the second column, and the drop down, those are the groups of variants at the past time. And I got feedback from reviewer and maintainer that so this drop down board was originally called instance, and I got a feedback that we need to also change this to variants. So for me, it was not clear, like, what should be part of instance and what should be part of the variants. So
Okay.
those could be my first question.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So I view a variant as something that you could use out of the box, and it includes like the necessary configuration for it. Instances are more examples of how a variant is used in the product or just live. So we would take, you know, one of these and use an instance of it over in the instances frame, and then update the content just to show kind of like a real product use of it. So that would be one example of an instance. Another example might be with, let's say, I think, badges can work. We'll roll with badges, where we want to show like how the different variants can be used. So for example, with badge, we have this info badge that has, as you can see, an icon and a text label for all of these. And then there's some that don't have the actual icon, I think, to adjust for spacing. And so the instances show like the different combinations that can be built from that variant, just as like a representation of how it would look when you make those changes. And that can be helpful for front end when they're wanting to do any kind of visual regression testing, to see like, okay, that's used correctly, the padding is correct. Another option is to show like how different style parameters can be changed. So the text here where a bold could be used, so it's like an individual style property. And then another example would be states. So showing how like just different statefulness of that. It's kind of maybe a 60-40 split. I don't know if that's a fair number between design systems and Figma that I see that have all of their states built out as variants as well, versus just like examples. We, as of today, have opted to have states be just like instances to keep the actual list of components in the assets panel from being so heavy. And then the number of items that would have to be updated, like if we updated a focus style and we had to go through and change that everywhere, that would create more work. I'm still kind of evaluating that in the back of my mind, if that's the best approach, and how often designers are using you know, hover and whatnot in maybe any kind of prototype or design. So anyway, so instances really show like the different extensions of it, the use cases, and then how different styles and attributes can be changed on that variant. So
that sounds clear to me. I think one of the most tricky part for me to choose was states, because I thought at first time states could be part of variants. And I noticed that from other boards that actually states are part of instance. And what I started to think, okay, instance is kind of the example board. Okay, that's good to know, but it seems like states. So is states should be part of example or not? But it seems like it's just a different styling, then it should be belong to the instance. I think so. It's more clear, sounds clear to me that if it is just applying different text style or visual style, then this should be part of the instance, not inside the variants, because variant is more like default component.
yeah, I would agree. And
Okay.
and so like, you know, and exactly how states are done here in your branch, where, you know, there's the ability to have that background color change and represented here. So from a front end standpoint, it's there, you know, that you can actually do that with the variant. I think it's a like that's how we've set it up. Now, this is a great time to just have that conversation where if you feel that, you know, maybe we should have states as, excuse me, as a variant. I think that's like a great topic for conversation too. So, and there might be some instances where we want to do that and some where we don't. I think about, let's go to tabs, for example, where, in here, an active tab is actually an option, but active is different than like a hover state, right? So it's a different type of state. It's a state set like specifically in the UI that's not related to any kind of HTML attribute or interaction. And here, what's interesting is the tab, it's like multiple things that change, right? It's the underline, it's the text weight. And so because of that, that's why that is a variant, and there always is one active. So that, that would be like a different exception. But then there's also states as part of the instance. So I could see where dropdowns kind of meet in the middle, right? Where having, let's say, like a list of options, like sorting or labels, where one of these is selected, it might be meaningful to have like a selected state that is separate from like the interactive, like hover, focus, active. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and let me know if I'm muddying the waters too. I don't want to make anything less clear.
And I would like to ask this question. I think it was coming from Vitika, that what do you think is the best way or best step-by-step way of creating a new variant? So for example, okay, I got the issue and assigned myself, okay, I'm going to recreate this variant of dropdown. So what would you, and where would you start?
Yeah, I would start with creating a branch from the component library. And then in that branch, I would make changes. And the way that like comparison works when like a maintainer goes to merge, like to review and merge changes, is it'll compare like the specific changes, what's added, what's been deleted, and also what's been like modified. And so you can see that a lot of these things have been removed. So I would, and some things have been edited, some things have been added. I would opt to try to update as much as what's there as possible, rather than like starting with any kind of new frame or anything like that. So I would take, this drop down, what exists today, and try to extend that as much as possible. If it wasn't, that's where I'd start to break from it, or change the structure if it wasn't doable. So I guess my summary would be to start with what is there and change it as much as possible before like duplicating or breaking anything out into a new frame, because then what happens is it's a little more challenging to compare what has actually been changed, if that makes sense, unless it is like a new component or etc. So if it was a new dropdown variant, I would add it to the existing dropdown component. If it was a new option, I would add it to the existing one rather than, doing something separate. And obviously, we can compare and figure out what has changed, but excuse me, it does make it a little easier to compare those changes when it's done like in that context of starting with what exists today.
Got it. And Jeremy, I was wondering, so when I was watching different videos on YouTube around creating new variants and how to manage design system, so there was a question, there were suggestions that always create your variants after creating instance of the base component. Like that was a good, like taught as a good practice. Is there any more of such good practice that we should be keeping in mind, or do we follow this practice at GitLab?
Yeah, I think we follow this practice. I'm going to look and see if there's any. I'm going to look at the branches that exist today. Let's see here. Not sure anything here would support that at the moment, but that's been my approach, is to create a base. I kind of work from Sketch, and not the app Sketch, but like Sketchbook. Like, I start with just jotting down, like, or even listing in Figma, like, here's all the different elements that need to be part of this. I'll create that base, and then from that base, I'll duplicate it and then start to make the variants from it. The most recent one I did that with was the input group, and that's where like I kind of had to deconstruct a lot of the form stuff to begin with, but I was able to do that and then start with an instance of that group and then go through and build out all the different variants after, from an instance of the base component. So that's been my approach. It's still one of those things where we could be more verbose with statefulness and things like that, but I'm just not sure yet if there's enough of a use case, if we're doing enough prototyping or things like that warrant having like quick use of like hover states and whatnot. But
this is helpful. Thank you so much.
yeah, I hope so. I know we're at time too, I believe, but is there anything else you'd like to cover here, or you'd like to set up any kind of follow-up, or
I mean, we would be working on those respective issues and maybe we'll ping you there. But another thing that I wanted to know was how could we participate in the foundation's open office hours, not open office hours?
Yeah, so there is a meeting. If it's not on your calendar, I believe it's like on the, I'm just looking at my calendar here. It should be on the, oh, come on, Google. On like the GitLab team meetings, I believe. I'm just double checking to see when the next one is here, but it should be on there. And yes, it is. Okay, I can confirm. The next one is on Monday the 13th, I believe. I don't know that there's any this week. Let me just look. The next one I see is on the 13th. I might be overlooking one, but I know there's one then, so you can look to see if it shows up. But the best way to participate there is just to drop something in that agenda, and then we can answer it either synchronously or async if you're not, like if the time doesn't work, and we can follow up there. So.
All right. Yeah, that answers my question. And that's it. That's all we had. Sanjay, anything else?
I think we forgot discussing the naming conventions, but I think we're almost at time.
Maybe we can catch up on that.
This is a tricky question, but yeah, I think that would also work, because I was like thinking about this a lot, like about how to use like naming the variants like true and false, or do I have to use it like something's name and none, for example? And we use different type of naming, and I like to make sure if I follow the right rule. If we don't have, we can also set a rule for that.
Yeah, so that's a great question too. I added the link to that Pajamas UI Kit contribution and updating guidelines. It's quite a long title there, and there are naming options in there, and so maybe let's see here. I'm looking at that file really quick. All right, so under components in that file, there's some examples of different naming methods that we've followed. So maybe, we can take that async, but take a look there. And then if anything is unclear, or you find examples in the UI kit today that you're like, I don't think that this follows this, let me know. And or if you need more flexibility there, we can take a look at that. So some of this has been like a moving target, because originally we did kind of a like Figma's hierarchy of page to frame to component naming, but then once they changed to component variants, like that kind of changed things a little bit. And so this was recently updated, but yeah, take a look and let me know what you think about that.
Sure.
Well, great then. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for this session. And I will share this recording on the UX channel because I'm very sure this will be helpful to so many people. Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.